coming up.
So with respect, I think it speaks very well to the...
On a un rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
There's a point of order, Chair.
Right.
Denying, for instance, trans children the access to puberty inhibitors, I just wanted to know if that is a denial of the right to health care.
For the last couple of meetings, we've heard some rather bizarre ideas from Ms. Fry, today suggesting that freedom of expression is irrelevant to democracy.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
The committee shall resume its study of the protection of freedom of expression. I'd like to start by welcoming our witnesses. We have two witnesses with us today. First, the Honourable Christopher Wells, Senator from Alberta. Mr. Wells, hello. And we also have Mr. Jacques Marcoux from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, Director of Research and Analytics, who is joining by video conference.
Mr. Wells, do you know three individuals by the name of Pam Davidson, Erica Barudis, and Mikhailo, it's a Ukrainian name, Martinyuk?
Personally? Or do I...
Do you know who they are?
I know they're Albertans.
Do you know the position to which they hold?
I do not.
They were elected as senators in waiting in the province of Alberta. Do you acknowledge that Albertans have a history, a tradition, and under various federal governments have been appointed, honoring the democratic will of Albertans, that prime ministers have appointed democratically elected senators to the Senate of Canada?
I'm not quite sure how that relates to my testimony here today or the topic of the committee, but...
So with respect, I think it speaks very well to the...
On a un rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
There's a point of order, Chair.
Right.
Chair, this is actually a point of order because that question has nothing to do with the freedom of expression study that we're doing right now.
Je vous entends, Dr.
I hear you, Dr. Fry. We have some latitude, as you yourself have said at numerous occasions when you were in the chair, but we will let Mr. Kurek finish his introduction, and hopefully he will tie this to the study topic. So, Mr. Kurek, if you can make it relevant to the study topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would note that Ms. Fry just referenced that Albertans shouldn't be free to express their democratic will and who represents them in Canada's Senate. So I would simply say, Mr. Chair, that when it comes to the will, the democratic will of Alberta,
Monsieur Kurek,
directly,
Monsieur Kurek, j'ai une pluie de rappel au règlement.
Mr. Kurek, we have multiple points of order. Just a second, Mr. Noor Mohammed, and then we will have to go to Dr. Fry. Mr. Chair, it's clear that we've decided to go ahead with this theater of the absurd today, but this is a serious study. But having a member of the committee misrepresented what another member of the committee has said, so they're making it sound like she said something she did not. So it's not fair, and it's not the approach we take in this committee. Mr. Kurek, I will ask that you bring your line of questioning to into relevance with the theme of the study, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate...
Apologies, Mr. Kurek. Yes, Ms. Fry, go ahead.
The point of privilege is that the honourable member has actually attributed things to me that I never said. So I would like him to apologize for putting words in my mouth and misrepresenting my statement.
Monsieur Kurek.
Mr. Kurek, you have heard the request by Ms. Fry.
On the point of order, Mr. Chair, Madam Dr. Fry had said that this was not related to this ongoing study on freedom of expression. Well, I would submit to you, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, that the ability for Albertans to express their democratic will by electing senators is absolutely in line with freedom of expression and the assured ability that Albertans, in this case, specifically have to exercise that freedom of expression. So if she didn't mean that, then I am happy to retract. But in her suggesting that somehow this isn't relevant to the study, I would suggest emphasizes the exact point that I was making.
Mr. Chair, I would like to
Madame,
respond again.
Dr. Fry,
Mr. Privilege?
Dr. Fry, s'il vous plaît, vous êtes...
Dr. Fry, please wait. Go ahead.
Point of...
Chair, the ability to interpret what someone said, despite the fact that I never use a language the member attributed to me, is really unfair, and it's totally the kind of thing that we've come to expect from the Conservative Party. They actually misrepresent what people say. They treat others with total...
Madame la Présidente, là, je pense qu'on est... Vous allez reconnaître... Madame la Présidente. Madame Fry, je pense qu'on devient... On est dans...
Dr. Fry, I think that is going into debate now, so I will bring everyone back to order. Mr. Kurek clearly said that if he has misinterpreted your words, then he would be happy to retract. So if you'll allow us, we'll come back to Mr. Kurek's question. So I'll just let you know that please stick to the theme of the study, and please stick to the opening remarks of Senator Wells. So I think you have about 4 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Wells was asked to appear here not simply as an expert in his previous field of work, but was asked to appear at this committee as a senator. So it directly relates to the relevance of and highlights the fake appointment process and the fake the fake reforms that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has brought forward to the Senate that truly are not only fake in terms of what they were said to accomplish, but directly relate to taking away the ability of Albertans to express themselves freely and to have their representatives doing the work that Albertans would expect them to do in our Senate. Mr. Chair, I would cede my time to Mr. Giovanni.
3 minutes, Monsieur Giovanni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
3 minutes, Mr. Giovanni.
I'd like to direct some questions to our witness, Mr. Marco. First off, Mr. Marco, are you familiar with Bill C-412, which is being considered in relation to a lot of the issues that you've raised in your opening statement today?
Yes, I am.
One of the points of debate, and certainly I think a lot of the issues you raised, sir, are concerns shared by many of us. One of the points of debate between Bill C-63 and Bill C-412 is whether the existing laws and frameworks in our country can be updated and strengthened to respond to your concerns, which is a primary objective of C-412, compared to Bill C-63, which is focused largely on building a $200 million bureaucracy and asking the Canadian public to trust that bureaucracy to accomplish the objectives that I believe you are sincerely interested in. So I'm wondering if you could maybe comment on whether you believe C-412 is an adequate response to many of your concerns, and if not, why you would prefer Bill C-63's highly bureaucratic, longer-term response to issues that people are looking for urgent action to.
Thanks for the question. When we've been calling for government regulation on the social media and tech space for years, and when we look at the landscape of what other countries are doing, certainly we can pick and choose components of what's going on in Australia, in the UK, in the EU, in the US, and cobble together what we think would be an ideal piece of legislation. There's also components within C-412 that are very interesting. The thing, though, is that, and I addressed this in my opening remarks, is that there's a perception that we have the required laws on the books currently, and oftentimes people will point to the criminal code and say, well, a lot of these things are illegal. But what we see when we deal with kids is that a lot of the harm doesn't necessarily reach a criminal threshold. And even if it did, our strategy can't be to wait till the crime has occurred and then try and respond. I think ideally, and this is how I think we treat a lot of areas in Canadian society, is to anticipate what those harms are at the system level and try and get ahead of them so that
Mr. Marco, we're low on time, and I do hope you'll get to continue your thoughts into future questions. What I would just leave you with, though, is I still think that the current Liberal government and the supporters of Bill C-63 still have yet to make a convincing argument to the majority of the public that a $200 million bureaucracy is the appropriate response to your concerns. And I think that's a challenge that we put forward to them, and they continue to fail to meet regularly.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Giovanni.
Thank you, Mr. Giovanni.
Governments are trying to prevent freedom of expression of LGBTQ, especially transvestites and trans persons who are from using their pronouns and from presenting themselves as they truly are. Now, what kind of harm happens to LGBTQ communities, drag queens, and trans children especially, when they are forbidden from expressing themselves? What are the physical, psychological harms that occur to them?
Thank you for the question. I'm glad we have an opportunity to talk about the harms directed towards the 2S LGBTQ plus community. I think we see a lot of what we can talk about the impacts of mental health, distress, but also what does it fundamentally mean to be denied the right to identity, to bodily autonomy? Impacts often turn to negative coping mechanisms. We know we have increased rates of depression, anxiety, negative coping mechanisms like turning to drugs and alcohol, or increased suicide ideation as well. So we know that, for example, just gender affirmation, whether that happens at home, within your faith community, at school, or through the healthcare system, helps to improve mental health, well-being, makes you feel part of the community around you.
And one last question, Mr. Chair, do I have time?
Vous avez encore 1 minute et demie.
You still have a minute and a half.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, because denying, for instance, trans children the access to puberty inhibitors, I just wanted to know if that is a denial of the right to health care. Denial of the right to autonomy of the person.
It's fundamentally a violation of their human rights and their right to self-expression, to freedom of expression. Access to gender affirmative care is a human right and is a part of our healthcare system.
And we know that physicians have said that, in fact, it is very scientifically appropriate and clinically appropriate to give, hormone replacement therapy to these kids. And if you deny them by law, what are you doing to their charter rights?
Yeah, you're absolutely violating their charter rights. There is a strong consensus in Canada by all medical associations and many professional associations that gender affirmative health care is medically necessary, is evidence-based, and is the right of individuals and the right of physicians to provide that care.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marcoux, I do have another question for you, and it's sort of just to give you some context. Like, for the last couple of meetings, we've heard some rather bizarre ideas from Ms. Fry, today suggesting that freedom of expression is irrelevant to democracy, and at our last meeting suggesting that freedom of expression is irrelevant to the expansion of the federal bureaucracy and the administrative state. So I do want to focus on that because I think it's important we speak to the concerns of Canadians. It sounds to me, Mr. Marcoux, that you are concerned about...
Est-ce que...
That was a little longer than I expected.
Madame Fry, est-ce que c'est un rappel au...
Ms. Fry, do you have a point of order or a question of privilege?
A point of privilege. Thank you very much. Chair, I am prepared to have the Conservatives disagree with what I say and do. I have not, for the last few meetings, had any. I was chairing. I was not asking questions of people. But
point of order.
To please get a sense that I am being misquoted here, misrepresented, and I would like my privilege as a parliamentarian has been, sullied, and I would like the member to apologize for misinterpreting and misspeaking about everything I've said so far today. Thank you.
Point of order.
Monsieur Giovanni.
Mr. Giovanni, Ms. Fry, Madam Fry has a point of privilege.
To be apologizing. Maybe Ms. Fry forgot, but these are recorded meetings, so there's video of her saying the outrageous things that I made reference to. So she could go back and look at the video if she'd like. But I don't have the memory of a goldfish. I remember what happened on Monday. Okay, if I can go back now. Mr. Marcoux.
Monsieur Giovanni.
Mr. Giovanni, we will finish this point before we will let you continue. We'll briefly suspend for about 30 seconds to have a conversation with the clerk. So, Mr. Giovanni, we are not able to review what was said. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Can you just let me finish? So we'll resume. We'll just ask that you are a bit more careful.
Une alerte. Ouais, ça va. Non, c'est une alerte Amber. Ah, non.
It's an Amber Alert. So I will just ask you that you are a bit more careful when interpreting the words of the other members of the committee, and we'll be able to continue with your turn. But Mr. Godin had a point of order. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, listen, I am not a regular member of the committee here. I heard the usual chair say that my colleague is a liar. And it was a couple seconds ago, or it was the interpretation that was off. I did not hear about someone being called a liar or lies, but we cannot go back and listen to what has been said. But Mr. Chair, I'll finish. I think it's important to make sure that we are not treating each other as liars. Yes, you are right. Please try to use a respectful vocabulary.
Mr. Chair, and it's I would just note that there have been a number of times where the regular chair occupant of this
Madame Fry,
this
Monsieur
committee
Couric est en train
is
d'énoncer un rappel au règlement. Je vous demande d'attendre un petit peu, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Fry, Mr. Couric is elaborating on a point of order, please.
And with respect, I am speaking on a point of order, Dr. Fry. So with respect, Chair, the regular chair occupant has, on a number of occasions over a number of meetings, interrupted in some cases questions posed by the conservative members of this committee, and which is ironic when it's talking about a study on freedom of expression. But certainly, I believe it is fully within the bounds of the discussion that we are having, the direction that Mr. Giovanni was taking, and if some members are unhappy with that, they are certainly
That's entering debate.
time to intervene in those regards.
Monsieur Couric, c'est du débat. J'ai bien pris note.
Mr. Couric, that's debate, but I duly noted. Ms. Fry, on that point of order.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I would comment on the, but that would be debate. I would comment on my ability as a chair to intervene when I think a line of questioning to a witness is disrespectful. It's my duty to make sure that happens. But I would like to point out that Mr. Giovanni mentioned what went on at a meeting that was in camera, and he's just breached the rules of in camera by doing so.
Merci, Madame Fry.
Thank you, Madam Fry. Mr. Giovanni, I will remind you that, yes, Monday, the meeting was in camera.
It happened last Wednesday when Ms. Fry had suggested that our public witness, Bruce Party, was making irrelevant comments in a discussion about the administrative state. That was last Wednesday, not on Monday. I did not address anything that was in camera. I appreciate that Ms. Fry wants to play a game here, but we're telling the truth about what she's been doing as chair of this committee.
Monsieur Giovanni, je vous arrête maintenant.
Mr. Giovanni, we are turning this whole thing into a debate, and so far, Mr. Nur Mohammed, did you have a point of order? No? Okay, thank you. Mr. Giovanni, you have the floor, and you have the floor for another 4 minutes and 40 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Marco, finally I get to ask you my question. Apologies for the delay. So, back to the concerns many Canadians have about the creation of a massive bureaucracy through Bill C-63. I'd be curious if, other Canadians who share your concerns, your objectives concerning the protection of children, do you appreciate why they are not favorable toward Bill C-63's expansion of the bureaucracy? Do you see why there are concerns about that posing a threat to freedom of expression in our country? And would you be able to find common ground with Canadians who share your concerns related to the protection of children online, but do not appreciate the way that Bill C-63 proposes to go about it?
Thank you for your question. As an organization, our concern is what's effective, what an effective bill or what an effective law looks like, or what effective regulation looks like. The details as to whether or not it's appropriately funded, or this is the right structure, or it's best to hand this over to the CRTC isn't really something that we're interested in weighing in on. What we want to see is a law that provides a system-wide safety net to kids, and quite frankly, any Canadian who uses these services. And we want to see this be rolled out and be effective. And we want to also catch up to the same protections that other kids in other countries currently have. And so that's really our chief concern at this time.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Marcoux. I'd like to see the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Couric.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marco, you're not in the room here, but we did have an Amber Alert actually that just rang, and I certainly pray that child is found soon, safely, and quickly. But it speaks to how live of an issue protecting kids is. And I know I spent some time at the Justice Committee discussing Bill C-270. A bill that would help with ensure that explicit material, there's that accountability for the distribution of non-consensual explicit material, and ensure that it is taken down, that there would be responsibility for both those who would share it and the companies that in some cases make it just incredibly difficult for victims, and it just heartbreaking stories. And I shared some of that testimony during my time at Justice. So here we are discussing freedom of expression. We have an Amber Alert which highlights how this is such a live issue. I'm wondering if you can comment specifically on Bill C-270, but to make sure that when it comes to protecting kids, that there is accountability for those who would share explicit material without consent, whether it be children or adults, maybe intimate partners or the like, and to ensure that there's accountability for both those who would share and the companies that have profited in many cases off of that material.
Mr. Kirk, just so I'm clear, Bill C-270, is that Mr. Vierson's private member's bill?
Yes.
Right. So I'm not incredibly familiar with the details of the bill, but I do know the broad strokes of the bill. And I think that is fundamentally a good example of working upstream and integrating a systems approach to protecting people online, where you impose obligations on service providers or anyone who wants to make available content to the general public, especially, I'll call it higher risk content like adult pornography. So a lot of those measures, and like I said, I'm not speaking to it specifically, just generically. Those are fundamentally things that, as an organization, we agree are good approaches. Things like ensuring that any video that's put online, especially on a pornography site, is consensual, that the person not only consented to being recorded in the first place, but consented to it being distributed, and then also continues to provide consent for that to be distributed, as well as all the, I'll call it, the co-actors in the video, to ensure that everyone within the actual content has provided their consent. So I think those are fundamentally great ideas.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Couric.
Thank you very much, Mr. Couric. Your 5 minutes are up. Now going to the Liberals, Mr. Talib Nur Mohammed.
There's a lot of folks on the right who are triggered by the use of pronouns. I certainly don't give a damn what somebody's pronouns are. As long as I understand what they are, I'll use them. I don't particularly care one way or the other. Why do you think the right is so triggered by people's use of pronouns?
Well, I think when people are triggered, it says more about themselves and their own beliefs than the individuals who just simply want to be respected for who they are and how they identify. It just comes down to good Canadian values about common decency and respect for your neighbor, respect for your community.
You're from Alberta. It's a province that prides itself in talking about freedom. And every time I've gone to Alberta, I've been struck by the incredibly kind, wonderful people that I've had the chance to interact with from all political stripes. And they all are very keen on personal freedom. Why is it, then, that there are these right-wing elements that are so triggered or so opposed to the expression of personal freedoms by members of the LGBT community?
It's a great question. I was born and raised in Alberta, chose to stay in Alberta, work in Alberta, and I'm proud to represent Albertans, including those from the 2S LGBTQ+ community who are proud Albertans. And all they want is to be respected and have the same rights and freedoms and privileges as anyone else in this country. And so, it's very perplexing why it's freedom for me, but not freedom for thee.
So that's an interesting point, this freedom for thee, for me, but not for thee. And we've heard a lot of this. The thing that I really wonder if you could spend a little bit of time, I don't know how much time we have left, probably another minute or so.
Environ 1 minute.
A minute, is exactly this question about the notion of freedom and the freedom of expression. How do you reconcile this notion that conservatives and small C conservatives, perhaps less so, but certainly big C conservatives these days in your home province and perhaps other places, have taken on some of the most vulnerable in our communities, young people who are dealing with identity issues, with sexual orientation issues. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because they're an easy target, or do you think it's because it certainly doesn't align with love thy neighbor? It certainly doesn't align with the values of love thy neighbor. So what do you think it is?
Well, I think we've seen around the world, in countries like Russia and in places like certain states in the United States, where these people become political targets. It distracts from the real important issues to Canadians, like being able to afford food, worrying about housing, worrying about the kind of job that you're able to have or retain. These become distractions, unfortunately, that are aided and abetted by unregulated social media and algorithms that seek to divide Canadians. And when we're divided, we're then most vulnerable to foreign interference and foreign governments and agents, right? This is a clear kind of strategy to sow dissent, to rip apart the very fabric of our democracy, which is diversity, multicultural, and pluralism, which are the hallmarks of our country that every Canadian should be proud that we have in this country.
Merci, Sénateur, Monsieur.